Your silence under pressure sent shockwaves through people who expected you to crack. They were waiting for it. You could feel them waiting, in the way they kept pushing, kept prodding, kept testing to see exactly where the breaking point was. They'd seen people crack before. They knew what it looked like. The raised voice, the tears, the desperate scramble to defend yourself against everything being thrown at you all at once. They were prepared for that version of events. They had their reactions ready, their commentary ready, their satisfaction already halfway assembled, and then you just didn't give it to them. Let's be honest about what pressure like that is designed to do. It's not really about the specific accusation or the specific situation or whatever the surface conflict happened to be about. Pressure like that is a test. It's designed to see how much it takes before you lose control of yourself, because once you lose control, the entire conversation shifts. It stops being about whatever the original issue was and becomes about your reaction to it. Suddenly you're the one who's unstable, the one who's too sensitive, the one whose behavior needs to be managed. That shift is the actual goal, whether or not anyone involved would admit it out loud. You understood that, somewhere along the way. Maybe not in those exact words, but in your body, in your instincts. You understood that reacting the way they expected would hand them exactly what they needed, so you didn't. You stood there, steady, quiet, and let the pressure hit something that didn't move. There's a specific kind of discomfort that settles into a room when someone doesn't react the way you expected them to. You could probably feel it happening in real time. The energy that was building towards some kind of explosive confrontation had nowhere to go because you refused to be the fuel. That discomfort isn't your problem to manage, it's theirs. They built a scenario that required your collapse to make sense, and when the collapse didn't come, the scenario just sat there, unfinished, awkward, exposed for exactly what it was. Silence, in moments like that, isn't the absence of a response, it is the response. It's just not the one they were prepared to receive, and because they weren't prepared for it, they had no idea what to do with it. You could see it on their faces, the confusion where the satisfaction was supposed to be. Think about what it actually takes to stay quiet when everything in you wants to defend yourself. It's not easy. It's not the path of least resistance. The instinct to explain, to correct the record, to make sure everyone understands your side of things is powerful, and overriding it takes something most people never have to develop, because most people never find themselves under that kind of pressure in the first place. You developed it. Maybe not because you wanted to. Maybe because circumstances forced you to learn it the hard way, through trial and error, through moments where reacting had cost you more than it ever gained you. That's the part nobody sees when they watch your composure now. They see the finished product, the steady person who doesn't flinch under pressure, and they assume that's just how you've always been. They don't see the versions of you that used to react, that used to explode, that used to hand people exactly the ammunition they wanted before you learned better. The silence they're witnessing now was built, deliberately, out of every earlier moment where silence would have served you better and you didn't yet know how to access it. There's something particularly unsettling to people about composure they can't provoke. Anger is easy to understand. Anger fits into a familiar story, one where the person under pressure loses their footing and everyone gets to watch it happen, either with sympathy or with satisfaction depending on which side they're on. Silence disrupts that story entirely. It refuses to give them the confirmation they're looking for. It leaves them holding all the pressure they built up with nowhere to release it, because you never gave them the reaction that pressure was designed to produce. That's exactly why it sends shockwaves, not because silence is dramatic. It isn't. It's the opposite of dramatic. But the absence of the expected reaction is its own kind of statement, louder in some ways than anything you could have said out loud. It tells everyone in the room that whatever they were counting on to happen simply isn't going to happen, and that realization lands harder than they expected it to. You should know that your silence wasn't weakness, even though some people will try to frame it that way after the fact. There's a particular kind of person who needs your calm to mean something smaller than what it actually was, because the alternative, that your composure was a form of strength they don't have access to themselves, is harder to accept. So they'll call it coldness, they'll call it avoidance. They'll suggest you were hiding something, or that you simply didn't care enough to respond the way a normal person would. None of that is true, and you know it isn't, even if you never bother correcting the record for people who were never going to listen honestly in the first place. Your silence was control. It was the result of understanding, clearly and completely, that reacting the way they wanted would have cost you more than staying quiet ever could. That's not the absence of feeling. That's the presence of judgment sharp enough to override feeling in the moment it mattered most. There's a difference between silence that comes from fear and silence that comes from strength, and people who've never developed the second kind often can't tell them apart. Fear-based silence shrinks you. It makes you smaller, quieter, less present in the room because you're afraid of what happens if you take up space. That's not what was happening here. What was happening here was a decision, made in real time, under real pressure, to withhold a reaction specifically because you understood exactly what giving it would cost you. That distinction matters because it's the difference between someone who's being silenced and someone who's choosing silence as a deliberate strategy. You weren't silenced, you chose this. And the difference between those two things is the entire reason it unsettled everyone who expected you to crack. Consider what actually happens to people who take the bait in situations like that. They react, loudly, defensively, and for a brief moment it might even feel satisfying, finally saying what needed to be said, finally pushing back against everything being thrown at them. But then the conversation shifts. Suddenly the story isn't about what actually happened. It's about how they reacted. Every future conversation about the situation gets filtered through that reaction instead of through the facts that actually mattered. That's the trap. It's designed to feel like relief in the moment and cost you everything afterward. You avoided that trap. Not by accident, but by understanding clearly what the long game actually required. Short-term satisfaction was never worth the long-term cost. You'd learned that lesson before, probably more than once, probably through situations that didn't go as well as this one did. And you applied that lesson here, in the exact moment it mattered most. People who've never had to develop this kind of control tend to assume it comes naturally to some people and not others, as though composure under pressure is just a personality trait you either have or don't. That's not accurate. Composure like this is built, slowly, through repeated exposure to exactly the kind of pressure that used to break you, until eventually it stops having the same effect. You weren't born calm under fire. You became calm under fire through a process that probably cost you more than anyone watching will ever fully understand. That process involved failure. It involved moments where you didn't stay silent, where you reacted exactly the way they wanted and watched the fallout unfold in real time. Those moments taught you something the successes couldn't have taught you on their own. They taught you exactly what was at stake, exactly what silence could have protected if you'd had access to it sooner. By the time this particular test arrived, you'd already paid the tuition for the lesson. You just applied what it cost you to learn. There's also something worth naming about what it means to sit inside pressure without needing to resolve it immediately. Most people are uncomfortable with unresolved tension. They want the conflict to reach some kind of conclusion as quickly as possible, even if that conclusion isn't actually favorable to them, because the discomfort of an open, unfinished moment feels worse than almost any resolution, even a bad one. You didn't need the immediate resolution. You could sit inside the discomfort of an unfinished moment without rushing to close it, because you understood that closing it on their terms, in their timeline, would have cost you more than simply enduring the discomfort a little longer. That's a kind of patience most people never develop, because most people are never forced to develop it. You were forced to develop it through whatever circumstances put you in that position in the first place, and now it's simply part of how you operate under pressure. Not because you enjoy discomfort, but because you've learned that rushing to end it rarely serves you as well as staying steady inside it a little longer than feels natural. Think about what they were actually hoping to see when they built that pressure in the first place. They wanted validation. They wanted proof that their assessment of you was correct, that you really were as unstable, as reactive, as easily provoked as they'd decided you were. Your silence denied them that validation completely. Not through argument, not through defense, but simply by refusing to perform the role they'd already cast you in. That refusal is its own kind of power, quieter than confrontation, but arguably more effective, because it leaves them with nothing to point to, no reaction to cite as evidence, nothing except their own unmet expectations sitting there, exposed. There will be people who never fully understand what they witnessed. They'll remember the moment, remember the pressure, remember that you didn't react the way they thought you would, and they'll file it away as strange, unusual, maybe even a little unsettling, without ever fully processing what it actually revealed about you. That's fine. You don't need them to process it correctly. The event happened. Your response happened. What they do with that information afterward isn't something you can control, and it was never actually the point in the first place. So let the shockwaves settle wherever they're going to settle. Let the people who expected you to crack sit with the discomfort of watching that expectation go unmet. You didn't stay silent to prove anything to them. You stayed silent because you understood, more clearly than they did, exactly what was at stake in that moment, and you protected it. That protection didn't require an audience to be worthwhile, and it doesn't require their understanding now to remain exactly as valuable as it was in the moment you chose it. There's something worth saying about the specific physical experience of staying silent under that kind of pressure, because it's not calm in the way people imagine calm to look from the outside. Internally, there was probably a storm happening the entire time. Your heart rate didn't necessarily slow down just because your face did. What you mastered wasn't the absence of internal reaction. It was the discipline to keep that reaction from reaching the surface, to let it exist privately, while presenting something completely different externally. That's a specific, learnable skill, and it's exhausting in ways that composure from the outside never reveals. People assume that because you looked calm, you felt calm. That's rarely how it actually works for anyone who's mastered this kind of control. What they're seeing is the output, not the process. The process is often loud, internal, demanding, requiring real effort to manage in real time. You did that work invisibly, in the exact moment it needed to happen, without any of it showing on the surface where they could see it. Consider what it means that you had the presence of mind to make that choice in the moment, rather than only being able to access it in hindsight. A lot of people can look back afterward and wish they'd stayed quiet, wish they hadn't taken the bait, wish they'd handled it differently. That kind of reflection is useful, but it's not the same as being able to actually execute the restraint while the pressure is actively happening. You executed it in real time, under conditions specifically designed to make that execution as difficult as possible. That's not a small thing. That's the actual skill, not the theory of it. It's easy to imagine staying calm under pressure when you're sitting somewhere safe, thinking hypothetically about how you'd handle a difficult situation. It's an entirely different thing to actually do it while the pressure is live, while the provocation is specific and personal and designed to land exactly where it would hurt most. You didn't have the luxury of hypothetical composure. You had to produce the real thing, on demand, in a moment that gave you no advance warning and no time to prepare. There's a reason people who study conflict often talk about the value of the pause, that small gap between provocation and response, where a different outcome becomes possible. Most people never learn to access that gap. The provocation and the reaction happen so close together, they feel like a single event, indistinguishable, automatic. What you did was find the gap and live inside it, even under conditions specifically engineered to close it as quickly as possible. That gap is where your silence actually happened, not in the absence of a reaction, but in the deliberate expansion of the space between the provocation and whatever you chose to do next. That space doesn't come naturally to most people. It has to be built, practiced, tested under conditions that don't always go well before it starts working reliably. You built that space through whatever came before this moment, through every earlier situation that taught you how expensive it is to let that gap collapse. Think too about what it does to the people applying the pressure when their strategy simply doesn't work. Pressure like that is usually built on an assumption that everyone eventually cracks if you push hard enough, long enough, precisely enough. When that assumption fails, it doesn't just fail quietly. It forces a reassessment of everything they thought they understood about how to get a reaction out of people. That reassessment is uncomfortable for them in ways that go beyond just this one situation, because it means their usual playbook might not work the next time either, on you or on anyone else who's learned the same lesson you have. You didn't set out to teach them anything, but the byproduct of your composure is that it removes a tool from their toolkit, at least where you're concerned. They can't rely on provoking a reaction out of you anymore, not with any confidence, because you've already demonstrated that the strategy doesn't reliably work. That shift changes the entire dynamic going forward, whether or not anyone acknowledges it directly. There's also something worth saying about how this changes your own relationship with pressure itself, beyond just that one specific moment. Once you've proven to yourself that you can stay steady under conditions designed to break you, pressure in general starts to feel less overwhelming, not because future pressure will be easier, it won't necessarily be, but because you now have direct personal evidence that you're capable of handling it differently than you might have assumed before you'd actually been tested. That evidence matters more than any external validation ever could, because it's yours. Nobody can take it away from you, and nobody needs to confirm it for it to remain true. So when people bring up that moment later, whether admiringly or dismissively, you don't need their framing to understand what actually happened. You know what it cost internally. You know what it took to keep that cost invisible while everything was happening in real time. That knowledge is enough. It doesn't need an audience, and it definitely doesn't need anyone's permission to count as exactly what it was, a quiet, deliberate act of control under conditions built specifically to strip that control away from you. They expected you to crack. You didn't. And whatever they do with that outcome now, whatever story they tell themselves to make sense of it, doesn't change what actually happened in that room, in that moment, when the pressure hit something in you that had already decided, long before that day, it wasn't going to move. There will be other moments like that one, probably more than you'd like. Pressure has a way of finding people again, testing whether the lesson actually held or whether it was situational, specific to that one circumstance, and unlikely to repeat. You already know the answer because you've lived it once under conditions that gave you every reason to fail. Whatever comes next, whatever future version of that test shows up in your life, you'll meet it the same way. Not because you enjoy the discomfort of staying quiet under pressure, but because you already know exactly what it protects and exactly what it costs to give that protection away.